from the land of the enemy. Thy children shall come again to their own border. Unquote. The quote in Matthew does not come from Jeremiah for several reasons. A, Jeremiah is referring to some Israelites who are crying because they have been taken captive out of Israel and their children are dying. His statement has nothing to do with Jesus. B, was heard shows that Jeremiah was speaking of an event that had already occurred. He quotes Yahweh as speaking in the past tense. C, how were the children Herod killed going to return from the land of the enemy? By saying they are not, Matthew is referring to children who are deceased, while in saying thy children shall come again to their own border, Jeremiah is referring to children who are still living. D, there is nothing in the verse that would justify its application to the children killed by Herod. And E, why wasn't Leah, rather than Rachel, represented as the grieving mother, since it was from her that Herod's victims were descended? Leah was the female ancestor of the inhabitants of Bethlehem. Jeremiah 31:15-17 is actually predicting that the Israelite children taken captive to Babylon will return to Israel. Fourth, Matthew 8:17 says that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, Himself took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses, unquote, and is supposedly a reproduction of Isaiah 53:4, which says, Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted, unquote. The obvious dissimilarities to be noted are A, when did Jesus bear the diseases he cured? B, when was Jesus smitten by God? And C, hath borne, smitten, and carried are past tense verbs, showing that an event prior to the time of Isaiah is under discussion. Fifth, Matthew 27:35 says that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, they parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots, unquote, and was supposedly taken from Psalm 22:18, which says, they part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture, meaning clothing, unquote. Apologists conveniently ignore the fact that A, Psalm 22 uses present tense verbs and is referring to events at the time of the author. B, the writer of Psalm 22 is not prophesying anything. And C, he's actually speaking of himself, not Jesus or anyone else. 6. Acts 13:30-33 says, God raised him, talking about Jesus, from the dead. And for many days he appeared to those who came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, who are his witnesses to the people. And we declare to you glad tidings, how that the promise which was made to the fathers, God has fulfilled the same to us, their children, in that he raised up Jesus again, as it is also written in the second Psalm, that is 2:7. And this is what is written. Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee, unquote. Anyone who has read Psalm 2:7 can't help but ask where it says that in some distant day, Jesus of Nazareth, Joseph's son, will be raised from the dead. Nowhere does the second Psalm contend that A, anyone will rise from the dead, B, he who is the Son of God must rise from the dead, C, Jesus will rise again from the dead, D, Jesus of Nazareth is the Son of God, or E, anyone risen from the dead shall be the Son of God. Seventh and lastly, Hebrews 1:5 says, I, this is God speaking, will be to him, supposedly Jesus, a father, and he shall be to me a son. It was deceptively taken from 2 Samuel 7:14, which says, I will be his father, and he shall be my son. Several factors show the verses are unrelated. A, Paul omitted the last half of the verse, which says, if he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men, and with the stripes of the children of men. And since Jesus couldn't commit iniquity, it has to be referring to someone else. Certainly God would not beat Jesus with a rod and cause stripes to be put on him. Would God even threaten to chasten Jesus with stripes? And B, in 2 Samuel 7:14, God is saying that he will call Solomon, not Jesus, his son. That completes our listing of misinterpretations and clearly demonstrates that New Testament writers often let their imaginations do their walking through Old Testament pages. Having completed our discussion of Scripture distorting Scripture, we are now free to discuss in our next program ignored teachings. We'd like to conclude today by critiquing another point made by Geisler and Brooks in their book entitled When Skeptics Ask. On page 124, while answering those who claim that the disciples of Jesus actually stole his body and there was no resurrection, they state, quote, this does not fit with what we know about the lives of these men. These weren't dishonest men. They all taught that honesty was a great virtue, unquote. In reply, I said, oh, brother, Nixon, Agnew, Swaggart, Baker, a well-known singer, and thousands of other people teach honesty as a virtue. But that's certainly not proof that they practice what they preach. Now who's being naive? The authors conclude, if this hypothesis of deception, he's talking about the one that the body was stolen, if this hypothesis were true, then we must also believe that the apostles persisted in this hoax and died for what they knew to be false, unquote. And I concluded with, where does the Bible say that they died for the cause? Moreover, only one thief would be required to remove a body. Why would all the apostles have to be involved in a plot? 11 of the 12 could very well have continued living under the delusion that Jesus rose from the dead. That completes our presentation. And please join us later for the 87th edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, when we'll continue showing why the Bible is nothing more than the flawed composition of some fallible human beings. Thank you for listening.